Marcus Johnson adjusted his black suit jacket one more time as he walked through the glass doors of Sterling Marketing Solutions. The office holiday party was already in full swing on the 15th floor, and he could hear the music and laughter echoing down the hallway. At 32, Marcus had worked his way up to senior account manager through pure determination and late nights, often staying behind when others went home to their families. Tonight was different though. Tonight, his 8-year-old daughter Zoe was spending the evening with his mother, giving him a rare chance to attend a company social event. The elevator doors opened to reveal the transformed office space. Twinkling lights hung from every corner, a massive Christmas tree stood by the windows overlooking downtown Chicago, and tables of food lined the conference room. His colleagues were already mingling, drinks in hand, sharing stories and laughing at inside jokes. Marcus grabbed a glass of sparkling cider from the bar, never one to drink alcohol at work functions, and made his way through the crowd. "Marcus, you actually made it," called out Jennifer from accounting, her face flushed with excitement and perhaps a glass or two of wine. "I was betting money you'd find some excuse to skip out early." Marcus smiled and shook his head. "My daughter insisted I should come and have fun for once. She said I work too much and need more friends." The honesty of children always surprised him with its accuracy. As he chatted with Jennifer about her upcoming vacation plans, Marcus noticed a commotion near the corner of the room. His boss, Rebecca Sterling, was holding court with a group of senior executives from their biggest client accounts. She commanded attention wherever she went, her silver hair perfectly styled, her navy blue dress elegant but professional. At 48, Rebecca had built Sterling Marketing from a small startup into one of the most successful agencies in the Midwest. She was brilliant, demanding, and completely dedicated to her work. Marcus had worked under Rebecca for 3 years, and their relationship was strictly professional. She pushed him hard, expected excellence, and rarely offered praise when deadlines were met. But she also trusted him with their most important accounts and had quietly supported his promotions when opportunities arose. He respected her business acumen, even if he found her intimidating during their weekly strategy meetings. "She's been hitting the wine pretty hard tonight," Jennifer whispered, nodding toward Rebecca. "I've never seen her this relaxed at a company event. Usually she's checking her phone every 5 minutes or stepping away for conference calls." Marcus looked over again and noticed Rebecca was indeed more animated than usual, gesturing expressively as she told some story that had the executives laughing. Her usually perfect composure seemed looser, her smile more genuine than the polished professional mask she typically wore. It was strange seeing her this way, almost human rather than the intimidating boss who could silence a room with a single glance. The party continued around them, with the DJ playing a mix of holiday classics and contemporary hits. Marcus found himself actually enjoying the evening, something that surprised him. Between single parenthood and career demands, social events had become rare luxuries he couldn't afford. But tonight, watching his colleagues let their guard down and seeing a different side of the office dynamics, he felt more connected to his workplace than he had in months. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus was deep in conversation with Tom from the creative department about their kids' Christmas wish lists when he heard raised voices near the bar. Rebecca was standing with David Chen, one of their biggest clients, and their conversation had clearly shifted from friendly to tense. David's face was red, his voice carrying across the room despite his attempts to keep it low. "I don't care how successful your agency has been, Rebecca. We're talking about real money here, and, frankly, I'm not sure you understand the pressure we're under from our board. Maybe it's time we considered other options." Rebecca's response was sharper than Marcus had ever heard in client meetings. "David, you've had 3 drinks and you're talking nonsense. Our campaign increased your sales by 37% last quarter. If you want to throw that away because you're having budget concerns, that's your decision, but don't pretend it's based on our performance." The conversation was attracting attention from other party guests, and Marcus could see Rebecca's assistant, Sarah, hovering nearby with a worried expression. David's wife was tugging on his arm, clearly embarrassed by her husband's public confrontation with their host. The situation was escalating quickly, and Marcus found himself moving closer, not sure what he intended to do but feeling like someone needed to intervene. "Rebecca," Marcus said quietly, stepping into their conversation circle. "I think David might appreciate hearing about the new campaign concepts we've been developing for the spring launch. Maybe we could find somewhere quieter to discuss the details." David turned toward Marcus, his eyes unfocused from alcohol. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Another one of Rebecca's yes men who's going to tell me how wonderful everything is while our costs keep climbing. I'm Marcus Johnson, Senior Account Manager. I've been working on your account for the past 18 months. Marcus kept his voice calm and professional, despite David's aggressive tone. "I understand budget concerns are always important, and I'd be happy to walk through our cost analysis and performance metrics whenever you'd like to schedule a proper meeting." Rebecca looked at Marcus with surprise, as if noticing him for the first time tonight. Her eyes were brighter than usual, and he could tell the wine had definitely affected her judgment. But there was also something else in her expression, a mixture of gratitude and curiosity that made him feel slightly off balance. "That's a great idea," Rebecca said, her voice regaining some of its usual authority. "David, why don't we table this discussion for now and schedule a proper meeting next week? Tonight should be about celebrating the year we've had, not diving into budget spreadsheets." David's wife finally succeeded in pulling him away from the conversation, muttering apologies about the long day and holiday stress. As they walked toward the elevator, David called back over his shoulder, "We'll definitely be having that meeting, Rebecca. And it might not go the way you think." The tension in the air was thick, and several party guests had stopped their own conversations to watch the drama unfold. Marcus could see Rebecca processing what had just happened, her professional mask slipping back into place as she realized how public the confrontation had become. "Thank you," she said quietly to Marcus, her voice barely audible above the music. "That could have gotten much worse if you hadn't stepped in." "Just doing my job," Marcus replied, though they both knew client management at office parties wasn't typically in his job description. David's been under a lot of pressure lately. His company's been struggling with some internal changes, and I think it's affecting his judgment. Rebecca studied Marcus's face for a moment, as if seeing him clearly for the first time despite working together for 3 years. "You know more about our clients' personal situations than I realized. That kind of insight is valuable in this business." Before Marcus could respond, the DJ announced the last dance of the evening, and couples began moving onto the small dance floor that had been cleared in the center of the room. Rebecca glanced around at the party guests, many of whom were still stealing curious looks in their direction after the confrontation with David. "I need some air," Rebecca said, more to herself than to Marcus. "This whole evening has been more complicated than I expected." Marcus watched as she made her way toward the balcony doors, her step slightly unsteady but determined. He found himself following, though he wasn't entirely sure why. The cold December air hit them both as they stepped outside, the city lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars. "You don't have to babysit me," Rebecca said without turning around. "I know I probably had too much wine tonight, but I'm perfectly capable of handling myself." "I'm sure you are," Marcus replied, leaning against the railing beside her. "But everyone needs backup sometimes, even bosses." Rebecca laughed, a sound Marcus had never heard from her before. It was genuine and slightly musical, completely different from her usual controlled professional demeanor. "Is that what you think you're doing? Providing backup?" "I think I'm standing on a balcony with my boss, watching her realize that wine and client management don't mix well at office parties." Brutal honesty. "I like that." Rebecca turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "You know, in 3 years of working together, I don't think we've ever had a conversation that wasn't about deadlines, budgets, or campaign strategies." Marcus considered this observation, realizing she was absolutely right. Despite seeing each other almost daily, their interactions had been strictly professional. He knew she was brilliant at her job, demanding of her employees, and completely dedicated to the company's success. But he knew nothing about her life outside the office, her interests, or what made her laugh the way she had just moments ago. That's probably because you're slightly terrifying in meetings, Marcus said with a smile. I've seen grown executives stumble over their words when you ask direct questions. Terrifying? Rebecca raised an eyebrow, though she was smiling. I prefer to think of myself as focused and efficient. Those aren't mutually exclusive with terrifying. The party continued inside, visible through the glass doors but feeling miles away in the cold night air. Marcus found himself studying Rebecca's profile as she looked out over the city, noticing details he'd never paid attention to before. The way she absently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The small scar on her chin that was barely visible unless you were standing close. The fact that despite her usual perfect composure, she seemed more relaxed and genuine out here than he'd ever seen her. Can I ask you something? Rebecca said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Of course. Why did you step in back there with David? You could have just let me handle it, or let him make a fool of himself. It would have been safer for your career to stay out of it. Marcus thought about the question, trying to understand his own motivations. I guess because I could see the situation was going somewhere bad for everyone involved. David's been a good client when he's thinking clearly. You've worked hard to build that relationship, and watching it fall apart over holiday party drama seemed wrong. So you were protecting the business relationship. Partly. Marcus paused, realizing there was more to it than professional considerations. But also because you looked like you could use an ally in that moment. Everyone deserves to have someone in their corner, especially when they are dealing with difficult people. Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, processing his answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. I've been running this company for almost 15 years, Marcus. I've gotten used to fighting my own battles, making the hard decisions, being the person everyone else comes to for answers. It's been a long time since someone stepped up to support me without being asked. The vulnerability in her admission surprised Marcus. This was definitely not the Rebecca Sterling he knew from quarterly reviews and strategy meetings. This was someone who carried the weight of leadership in ways he'd never considered, someone who might be just as human and uncertain as everyone else, despite her polished exterior. Maybe you should let people help more often, Marcus suggested gently. You've built a good team here. Most of us would probably be willing to do more if we knew you wanted the support. It's not that simple when you're the boss, Rebecca replied. Every decision I make affects people's careers, their families, their futures. If I show uncertainty or weakness, it undermines confidence in the company's direction. Marcus understood the isolation she was describing, though from a different perspective. As a single parent, he knew what it felt like to carry all the responsibility for important decisions, to be the person everyone counted on for stability and answers. The pressure was exhausting, even when you loved the people you were protecting. Being strong doesn't mean you have to be alone, he said quietly. Rebecca turned to look at him fully, something shifting in her expression. For just a moment, the professional distance between them seemed to dissolve, replaced by a recognition of shared understanding. They were both people who had learned to carry heavy burdens with grace, who put others' needs before their own, who had forgotten what it felt like to have someone else worry about their well-being. The moment was interrupted by Sarah, Rebecca's assistant, appearing at the balcony doors with a concerned expression. Rebecca? I'm sorry to interrupt, but the caterers are asking about cleanup, and there are a few people wanting to say goodbye before they leave. Reality crashed back in as Rebecca straightened, a professional mask sliding back into place. Of course. Thank you, Sarah. We'll be right in. As they walked back toward the party, Marcus felt the strange intimacy of their conversation already becoming something that seemed impossible in the bright lights of the office. But Rebecca paused just before they reached the doors, her hand briefly touching his arm. Marcus? Thank you again for tonight. For stepping in with David, and for the conversation out there. I won't forget it. Before he could respond, she was back in boss mode, saying goodbye to departing guests and coordinating with the catering staff. Marcus watched her seamlessly transition back into her leadership role, but now he could see the effort it required, the conscious choice to prioritize everyone else's needs over her own comfort. The party wound down quickly after that, with most guests heading home to their families and holiday plans. Marcus helped stack chairs and clear tables, staying until the office was back to its normal state. Rebecca worked alongside everyone else, directing the cleanup with her usual efficiency, but Marcus noticed she was moving more carefully than usual, the effects of the wine still evident in her slightly deliberate movements. As the last of the catering staff packed up their equipment, Marcus realized Rebecca was one of the few people left in the office. Sarah had left an hour ago, and most of the other employees had headed home as soon as the party officially ended. Rebecca was gathering her things from her office, moving with the slow precision of someone trying very hard to appear more sober than they actually were. "Rebecca," Marcus called out as she emerged from her office with her purse and coat. "Are you driving home tonight?" She paused, considering the question with the careful thought of someone whose judgment was impaired but who was trying to make responsible decisions. "I was planning to call a cab." "I'm not stupid, Marcus, despite evidence to the contrary tonight. Where do you live? I could give you a ride home if it's not too far out of the way." Rebecca hesitated, and Marcus could see her weighing the propriety of accepting a ride from an employee against the practical need to get home safely. Professional boundaries were clearly important to her, but so was making smart choices about her safety. "I live in Lincoln Park," she said finally. "But that's probably not on your way home." Marcus smiled. "Actually, I live in Lakeview, so Lincoln Park is practically on my way. Come on, let me drive you home. You can lecture me about appropriate employee-supervisor boundaries tomorrow if you want." For the first time all evening, Rebecca laughed without reservation, a sound that transformed her entire face. "Deal. But I'm buying coffee for the office tomorrow to make up for my questionable decision-making tonight." As they rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Marcus found himself curious about this different version of his boss. The wine had stripped away her usual professional armor, revealing someone who was more thoughtful, more vulnerable, and more genuinely funny than he'd ever imagined. It made him wonder what other surprises lay beneath the surface of people he thought he knew well. The drive through Chicago's quiet streets gave Marcus and Rebecca a chance to continue their conversation away from the office environment. Rebecca had rolled down her window slightly, letting the cold December air help clear her head, while Marcus navigated the familiar route toward Lincoln Park. The city looked different at this hour, more peaceful and intimate than during the busy daytime rush. "Can I ask you something personal?" Rebecca said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Marcus glanced over at her, noting that she seemed more alert now than she had when they left the office. "Sure. You mentioned your daughter earlier. How old is she?" 8. "Her name is Zoe." Marcus smiled automatically at the mention of his daughter. "She's spending the night with my mom tonight, which is the only reason I was able to stay at the party this long." 8 is a wonderful age, Rebecca said warmly. "Old enough to have real conversations, but still young enough to believe in magic." "What's she asking Santa for this year?" The question surprised Marcus with its genuine interest. He'd never heard Rebecca mention children or family life, and he'd assumed she was completely focused on her career. "She's been campaigning for a bicycle for months now. A purple one with streamers on the handles and a basket for her stuffed animals. She's very specific about the details." Rebecca laughed. "Smart girl. If you're going to dream, you might as well be specific about what you want." "What about you?" Marcus asked. "Do you have kids?" The question seemed to catch Rebecca off guard, and she was quiet for several moments before answering. "No, I don't. I've been so focused on building the business that family life got pushed aside. Sometimes I wonder if that was the right choice, but it's hard to regret decisions that led to something you're proud of." Marcus heard the wistfulness in her voice and realized this was probably not a topic she discussed often. "It's never too late, you know. Some of the best parents I know didn't start until later in life." "Maybe," Rebecca said softly. "Though at 48, I'm probably better suited to being the fun aunt than starting over with diapers and sleepless nights." They pulled up to a beautiful brownstone in one of Lincoln Park's most desirable neighborhoods. Even in the dark, Marcus could see it was the kind of home that spoke to success and good taste. Rebecca had clearly done well for herself professionally, but the house also looked somehow lonely, with only a single light burning in a front window. "This is me," Rebecca said, but she made no immediate move to get out of the car. Instead, she turned to face Marcus more fully. "Thank you for the ride, and for everything tonight. I know I wasn't at my most professional this evening." "You were human," Marcus replied. "That's not the same thing as unprofessional." Rebecca studied his face in the dim light from the street lamp, as if trying to read something in his expression. "You're very kind, Marcus. And perceptive. I can see why your clients trust you." "I just try to pay attention to what people need," he said simply. "And what do you think I need?" The question was asked quietly, with a vulnerability that made Marcus's heart rate increase slightly. It was a dangerous question, loaded with possibilities that could complicate their working relationship in ways neither of them had fully considered. Marcus found himself thinking about the loneliness he'd sensed in her earlier comments about family, about the way she'd looked when she mentioned fighting her own battles for 15 years. "I think you need someone who sees past the boss persona to the actual person underneath," he said carefully. "Someone who appreciates how hard you work to take care of everyone else, and who wants to take care of you for a change." The honesty of his answer surprised them both. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly, and Marcus realized he'd crossed a line from friendly concern into something more personal and potentially complicated. But he didn't regret saying it, because it was true. The woman sitting next to him deserved to have someone in her life who valued her for more than her professional accomplishments. "Marcus," Rebecca said softly, her voice containing a note of warning. "I know," he said quickly. "I know this is complicated because we work together, and I know you've been drinking tonight, which makes anything we say or do questionable in terms of good judgment. I'm not trying to put you in an awkward position." "Then, what are you trying to do?" Marcus considered the question, trying to understand his own motivations and feelings. The evening had shifted something fundamental in how he saw Rebecca, but he wasn't sure if that was because of the alcohol loosening her usual defenses or because he'd finally been given a chance to see who she really was underneath the professional armor. "I'm trying to be honest about the fact that tonight showed me a side of you I'd never seen before, and I found myself liking that person very much," he said finally. "I'm trying to figure out if that's something worth exploring, or if it's just the unusual circumstances making everything seem different than it really is." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her processing his words, weighing the implications and complications. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the wine she'd consumed. "I like you too, Marcus. More than I expected to, and definitely more than is probably wise given our working relationship." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I also know that I've had too much to drink tonight, and that always makes things seem more possible than they might be in the cold light of day. So what do we do? We say goodnight, and we both think about whether what happened tonight was real or just the result of holiday party atmosphere and too much wine," Rebecca said practically. "And then we see how we feel about each other on Monday morning when we're back in the office and everything is normal again." It was a reasonable plan, the kind of careful approach Marcus would expect from someone as thoughtful and responsible as Rebecca. But it also felt like a missed opportunity, a chance for connection that might not come again once they returned to their professional roles. "Can I ask one more favor?" Marcus said as Rebecca reached for the door handle. "What?" "If you decide on Monday that tonight was just an anomaly and we should go back to our strictly professional relationship, that's fine. I'll respect that completely. But if you decide there might be something worth exploring here, would you let me know? Because I'm going to be spending the weekend thinking about this conversation, and I'd rather not spend months wondering what you decided." Rebecca smiled, the first completely unguarded expression he'd seen from her all evening. "That's fair. I promise I'll let you know either way." She got out of the car and walked to her front door, turning to wave goodbye before disappearing inside. Marcus sat in his car for several minutes after she went in, trying to process everything that had happened. A few hours ago, Rebecca Sterling had been his intimidating boss who he respected but barely knew as a person. Now she was a woman he found himself genuinely attracted to, someone whose vulnerability and intelligence had caught him completely off guard. The drive home to his apartment in Lakeview gave Marcus time to think about the implications of his growing feelings for Rebecca. Dating his boss was complicated enough under normal circumstances, but as a single father, he had additional considerations. Zoe's stability and his career security were paramount, and getting involved with Rebecca could potentially threaten both if things went wrong. On the other hand, Marcus had been single for 3 years since his divorce, focused entirely on work and parenting with little time or energy for romantic relationships. He told himself he was content with that arrangement, that Zoe needed his full attention during these important early years. But tonight had reminded him that there were parts of himself he'd set aside, needs he'd ignored in favor of being the best father and employee he could be. His apartment was quiet when he arrived home, Zoe's absence always making the space feel too large and somehow incomplete. Marcus checked his phone and found a text from his mother confirming that Zoe was asleep and excited about the pancake breakfast they'd planned for the morning. The normalcy of family life felt both comforting and slightly surreal after the unexpected intimacy of his conversation with Rebecca. Marcus poured himself a glass of water and sat on his couch, replaying the evening's events. The confrontation with David Chen had been uncomfortable but manageable. The real surprise had been discovering that Rebecca was not only human underneath her professional exterior, but specifically the kind of human he found himself drawn to. Intelligent, funny, vulnerable when she let her guard down, and genuinely caring about the people who worked for her. But Marcus also recognized that alcohol and unusual circumstances could make anyone seem more appealing than they might be in everyday situations. Rebecca had been right to suggest they both think carefully about whether their connection was real or just the product of holiday party dynamics. The smart thing would be to wait and see how they felt about each other in the context of their normal working relationship. The next morning, Marcus woke up with his phone buzzing. A text from his mother let him know that Zoe was awake and asking when Daddy would come pick her up. But there was also an unexpected message from Rebecca, sent early enough that she was clearly an early riser despite the previous evening's wine consumption. Thank you again for last night. Coffee is on me Monday morning, as promised. Hope you're having a good weekend with Zoe. The message was friendly but carefully neutral, giving no indication of her thoughts about their conversation or what she'd decided about the possibility of something developing between them. Marcus appreciated her discretion, but he also found himself disappointed by the lack of any personal warmth in the text. He drove to his mother's house to pick up Zoe, who was full of stories about her sleepover and excited plans for their Saturday together. They went to the park, built a snowman in the small yard behind their apartment building, and made hot chocolate while Zoe told him about all the Christmas decorations she'd seen in his mother's neighborhood. "Daddy, why do you look different today?" Zoe asked as they sat on the couch sharing a bowl of popcorn while watching a holiday movie. "Different how?" "I don't know. Like you're thinking about something happy but also worried about it at the same time." Marcus was continually amazed by his daughter's perceptiveness. At 8 years old, Zoe had an intuitive understanding of emotions and relationships that often surprised him. He wondered how much he should share about his confusing feelings regarding Rebecca. "I had an interesting conversation with someone at the work party last night," he said carefully. "Sometimes when you learn new things about people, it makes you think about them differently." Zoe considered this seriously. Was it a good different or a bad different? Good, I think. But complicated. Is it about a lady? Marcus laughed, realizing his daughter had immediately zeroed in on the heart of the matter. Maybe. Why do you ask? Because you have that look you get when you're watching the romantic parts of movies and pretending you don't like them, Zoe said matter-of-factly. You're too smart for your own good, Marcus told her, ruffling her hair. So when do I get to meet her? The assumption in Zoe's question caught Marcus off guard. His daughter had only met one woman he'd dated since his divorce, and that relationship had ended before it became serious enough to warrant introductions. But Zoe's casual acceptance that there might be a new woman in their lives made him realize how much his daughter wanted him to be happy, even if it meant changes to their current routine. "I don't know if there's going to be anything to meet her about," Marcus said honestly. "We work together, which makes things complicated." "Oh," Zoe said, processing this information. "Is she your boss?" "How did you know that?" "Because you said it was complicated, and you always say work stuff is complicated when it's about bosses and important people." Marcus marveled again at his daughter's ability to read between the lines of adult conversations. "You're right. She is my boss, which is why I'm not sure anything can happen between us, even if we both wanted it to." "But you do want it to?" The direct question forced Marcus to confront his own feelings more honestly than he'd been willing to do since the previous evening. Did he want something to develop with Rebecca? The answer was increasingly yes, despite all the logical reasons why it would be complicated and potentially problematic. "I think I might," he admitted to his daughter. Zoe smiled and snuggled closer to him on the couch. "Then, I hope it works out, Daddy. You deserve to have someone who makes you happy." The simple wisdom of her statement stayed with Marcus through the rest of the weekend. He'd been so focused on being a good father and provider that he'd forgotten he also deserved personal happiness. Zoe's blessing, given without any prompting or explanation, made him realize that pursuing a relationship with Rebecca wouldn't necessarily be selfish or harmful to his daughter's well-being. Sunday evening, as Marcus was helping Zoe with her homework and preparing for the week ahead, his phone buzzed with another text from Rebecca. "I've been thinking about our conversation Friday night. Would you be free for coffee Tuesday evening? There are some things I'd like to discuss away from the office." Marcus read the message 3 times, his heart rate increasing with each reading. The fact that she wanted to meet outside the office suggested she'd been thinking about more than just work-related topics. But her careful wording also indicated she was still being cautious about whatever she wanted to discuss. He texted back quickly, "Yes, I'd like that. What time and where?" Her response came within minutes. "There's a quiet coffee shop called Brewpoint on Clark Street. 7 o'clock work for you?" "Perfect. See you Tuesday." As Marcus helped Zoe get ready for bed, he found himself both excited and nervous about Tuesday's meeting. Rebecca's invitation suggested she'd decided their Friday night conversation was worth pursuing, but he had no idea what conclusions she'd reached about the possibility of a relationship between them. Monday morning at the office felt surreal. Rebecca was back to her usual professional demeanor, running meetings with her typical efficiency and focus. But when their eyes met during the weekly staff meeting, Marcus caught a glimpse of something warmer than her usual polite acknowledgement. She was carefully maintaining appropriate boundaries, but there was an awareness between them that hadn't existed the previous week. The coffee she'd promised materialized in the break room Monday morning, along with pastries from everyone's favorite bakery. Several colleagues commented on her unusual generosity, joking about holiday spirit and year-end bonuses. Rebecca accepted their thanks graciously but didn't explain her motivation, leaving Marcus wondering if anyone else could sense the subtle shift in dynamics between them. Tuesday dragged by slowly, with Marcus finding it difficult to concentrate on his usual tasks. He left the office at his normal time, went home to have dinner with Zoe and help with homework, then drove to the coffee shop Rebecca had suggested. Brewpoint was exactly the kind of place he'd expect her to choose, quiet, sophisticated, with comfortable seating that encouraged conversation rather than quick coffee runs. Rebecca was already there when he arrived, seated at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. She looked different outside the office, more relaxed despite the serious expression on her face. She was wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater instead of her usual business attire, and her hair was loose around her shoulders rather than pulled back in its typical professional style. "Thank you for meeting me," Rebecca said as Marcus sat down across from her. "Thank you for asking," he replied. "I've been curious about what conclusions you reached over the weekend." Rebecca smiled slightly at his directness. "I spent a lot of time thinking about Friday night, and about whether what happened between us was real or just the result of unusual circumstances and too much wine." "And what did you decide?" "I decided that the wine might have lowered my inhibitions, but it didn't create feelings that weren't already there, Rebecca said carefully. I've been aware of you as more than just an employee for longer than I care to admit, Marcus. Friday night just gave me an excuse to acknowledge it. The admission surprised Marcus with its honesty and vulnerability. How long? Rebecca looked slightly embarrassed. Remember the Morrison account presentation 6 months ago? You stayed late 3 nights in a row to get the numbers right, and then you presented the whole strategy with this quiet confidence that completely won over their entire board. I remember thinking that you were exactly the kind of man I'd want to work with if I were building something important. And, from professional admiration to personal interest was a short jump. Shorter than I expected, Rebecca admitted. But I've been telling myself it was inappropriate and complicated, which it definitely is. Marcus reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, a gesture that felt both natural and significant. Rebecca, I need you to know that I've been thinking about you differently since Friday night too. Not just because of the wine or the unusual circumstances, but because I got to see who you really are underneath the boss persona. And who do you think I really am? Someone who cares deeply about the people around her, even when she has to make difficult decisions. Someone who's been carrying a lot of responsibility alone for a long time. Someone who's forgotten what it feels like to have a partner instead of just employees and clients. Rebecca's eyes filled with unexpected tears, and Marcus realized his assessment had hit closer to home than she'd expected. You see too much, she said quietly. I see someone I'd like to get to know better, if you're willing to figure out how to make that work given our professional situation. It would be complicated, Rebecca warned. Office relationships are always tricky, but when there's a power imbalance like ours, it becomes even more difficult. People will talk, they'll question your promotions and my decisions. Some will assume you're getting special treatment, others will think I'm taking advantage of my position. Marcus had considered all of these complications over the next few weeks at Sterling Marketing Solutions required careful navigation as Marcus and Rebecca began exploring their relationship while maintaining professional boundaries at work. They developed an unspoken system of communication, with brief eye contact during meetings and subtle gestures that acknowledged their growing connection without drawing attention from colleagues. Their first official date took place the following Saturday evening. Marcus had arranged for Zoe to spend the night with his mother again, giving them the freedom to take their time getting to know each other outside the constraints of work schedules and office dynamics. Rebecca had suggested a small Italian restaurant in a neighborhood where they were unlikely to encounter colleagues, showing her awareness of the need for discretion. Marcus arrived at the restaurant first, choosing a quiet corner table where they could talk without being overheard. When Rebecca walked in, he was struck again by how different she looked outside the office environment. She wore a simple black dress and minimal jewelry, her usual professional armor replaced by an elegance that seemed more natural and relaxed. You clean up pretty well yourself, Rebecca said with a smile as she sat down, noting Marcus's carefully chosen button-down shirt and jacket. Though I have to admit, I'm nervous about this. Why? Because it's been a very long time since I've been on a real date, Rebecca admitted. The last few years, my idea of a romantic evening was working late with takeout Chinese food and a man who understood that conference calls might interrupt dinner. Marcus laughed at the mental image. That sounds depressing. It was, Rebecca agreed. Which is probably why those relationships didn't last long. Most men aren't interested in competing with a business for attention, and I wasn't willing to give the business less than everything I had. What's different now? Rebecca considered the question while they looked over their menus. Maybe I've finally proven to myself that the business can succeed, so I don't feel like I have to sacrifice everything else to make it work. Or maybe I'm just finally ready to admit that professional success isn't enough to make a person happy. Their conversation over dinner revealed layers of compatibility that surprised them both. Rebecca talked about her childhood in Ohio, where her father had run a small manufacturing company that struggled during economic downturns. She'd learned early that business ownership meant constant uncertainty and sacrifice, but also the possibility of building something meaningful that could provide security for many families. Marcus shared stories about his own background, growing up in Chicago's South Side where his mother had raised 3 children alone after his father left when Marcus was 12. He'd learned responsibility early, helping care for his younger siblings while his mother worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. The experience had taught him the value of stability and the importance of being someone others could depend on. "Is that why you're such a good employee?" Rebecca asked. "Because you understand what it's like when people are counting on you." "Partly," Marcus said. "But also because I've seen what happens when someone gives up on their responsibilities. I never want to be the person who lets others down because I couldn't handle the pressure. That's a heavy burden to carry. No heavier than running a company and being responsible for everyone's livelihood," Marcus pointed out. "At least my responsibilities are mostly limited to one 8-year-old girl and whatever accounts you assign me." Rebecca smiled at his perspective. "Tell me more about Zoe. What's she like?" Marcus's face lit up as he talked about his daughter. He told Rebecca about Zoe's love of reading and her ability to make friends with anyone, about her determination to learn the violin despite her complete lack of musical talent, and about her recent decision that she wanted to be either a veterinarian or the president when she grew up. "She sounds remarkable," Rebecca said warmly. "You've obviously done an amazing job raising her." "We've done a good job raising each other," Marcus corrected. "She's taught me as much as I've taught her, maybe more. Having a child forces you to become the person they need you to be, which is usually better than the person you thought you were." "Do you think she'd be okay with you dating someone?" Rebecca asked carefully. The question showed her awareness of the complications that came with dating a single parent. Marcus appreciated that she was thinking about Zoe's needs and feelings rather than just assuming children would automatically adjust to adult decisions. "I think she'd be happy if I was happy," Marcus said. "But she'd also need time to get used to the idea of sharing me with someone else. Right now, it's been just the 2 of us for 3 years. Any changes to that dynamic would need to happen gradually. I wouldn't want to rush anything that might make her uncomfortable," Rebecca assured him. "Kids need to feel secure in their relationships with their parents before they can accept new people in their lives." The consideration in her response told Marcus a lot about Rebecca's character. Despite having no children of her own, she understood the importance of putting Zoe's well-being first. It was exactly the kind of thoughtfulness he'd need from anyone who wanted to become part of their lives. After dinner, they walked along the lakefront, bundled against the December cold but reluctant to end the evening. The conversation flowed easily between serious topics and comfortable humor, with none of the awkwardness Marcus had worried might arise from their workplace relationship. "Can I ask you something that might be too personal?" Rebecca said as they paused to look out over the dark water. "After tonight, I think we're past worrying about too personal. What happened with Zoe's mother? You mentioned you've been divorced for 3 years, but you haven't talked about her at all." Marcus was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts about a topic he rarely discussed. "Angela and I got married right after college because it seemed like the next logical step. We were good friends who thought that was enough to build a marriage on. When Zoe was born, we both tried to make it work, but we wanted completely different things from life." "What did she want that you didn't?" "Freedom, mostly. The ability to travel, to take risks, to change direction when something stopped being fun. Zoe and I represented stability and routine, which felt like a trap to her. She tried to be a good mother, but she was miserable being tied down to family responsibilities." Rebecca nodded understanding. "So she left. She moved to California when Zoe was 5. She pays child support and calls once a week, sends birthday and Christmas presents. She loves Zoe, but she's not cut out for the day-to-day reality of parenting. It was better for everyone when she accepted that about herself. That must have been difficult for you." "The divorce was a relief, honestly. Living with someone who resented the life we'd built together was much harder than being alone with Zoe. At least now I know that the people in our lives want to be there. And you're not worried about making another mistake? About getting involved with someone who might not be ready for the reality of your life?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face Rebecca directly. "Are you asking if I'm worried about you, specifically?" "Maybe. Rebecca, you've spent 15 years building a business from nothing, managing employees, making difficult decisions that affect people's lives and livelihoods. You understand responsibility and commitment better than most people. I'm not worried about you running away when things get complicated. But you should know that I don't have much experience with children, Rebecca said. I've never been around kids enough to know if I'm any good with them. Do you want to be good with them? Yes, Rebecca said without hesitation. Especially with Zoe, if this relationship goes where I hope it might. The certainty in her voice reassured Marcus more than any promises about her experience with children could have. Caring about Zoe's well-being was more important than knowing exactly how to handle every situation that might arise. They ended the evening at Rebecca's front door, where Marcus found himself uncertain about the appropriate ending to their first real date. The attraction between them was obvious, but their professional relationship and the newness of their personal connection made physical intimacy feel premature. Rebecca seemed to understand his hesitation. This was perfect, she said softly. Thank you for a wonderful evening. Can I see you again? Outside of work, I mean. I was hoping you'd ask, Rebecca smiled. But maybe next time we could do something less formal? I'd like to see more of who you are when you're not trying to impress me. Any suggestions? Actually, yes. Zoe mentioned wanting to see the Christmas lights downtown, didn't she? Maybe the three of us could go together next weekend. If you think she'd be okay with that. Marcus was surprised by the suggestion, both because Rebecca had been listening when he mentioned Zoe's interests and because she was volunteering to meet his daughter much sooner than he'd expected. Are you sure you're ready for that? 8-year-olds can be pretty overwhelming. I'm sure I'll be nervous, Rebecca admitted. But I'd rather be nervous about meeting her than spend weeks wondering what she's like. Besides, you'll be there to translate if I say something completely wrong. The next week at work felt different for Marcus, though he hoped not obviously so to their colleagues. Rebecca maintained her professional demeanor during meetings and interactions, but there were small moments of connection that made his heart rate increase. A brief smile when she handed him a file, her fingers brushing his when she passed him coffee during a client conference, the way she said his name with just slightly more warmth than she used for other employees. Friday afternoon, Rebecca stopped by his desk as the office was emptying for the weekend. Is tomorrow still good for Christmas lights? She asked quietly. Zoe's been talking about it all week, Marcus confirmed. She's planned our entire route through downtown and made a list of everything she wants to see. Should I be worried about keeping up with her energy level? Marcus grinned. You've survived 15 years of running a marketing agency. I think you can handle one excited 8-year-old for a few hours. Saturday arrived cold and clear, perfect weather for walking through downtown Chicago's holiday displays. Marcus picked up Rebecca at her house, and she was waiting on the front steps wearing jeans, snow boots, and a thick coat that made her look younger and more approachable than her usual business attire. Nervous? Marcus asked as they drove toward his apartment to pick up Zoe. Terrified, Rebecca admitted with a laugh. What if she doesn't like me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I'm boring compared to her friends' parents? Rebecca, you're successful, intelligent, and kind. Zoe is going to be impressed just meeting someone who runs her own company. Trust me, you'll be fine. Zoe was waiting by the window when they pulled up, dressed in her favorite purple coat and the new scarf her grandmother had knitted for her. She bounded down the front steps with the enthusiasm of a child who'd been looking forward to this adventure all week. Daddy? Is this her? Is this Rebecca? Zoe asked as she climbed into the back seat. Zoe, this is Rebecca Sterling. Rebecca, meet my daughter Zoe. Rebecca turned around in the front seat to face Zoe directly. Hello, Zoe. Your father has told me wonderful things about you. I hear you're an expert on Chicago Christmas lights. I know where all the best ones are, Zoe said proudly. Daddy, did you tell her about the big tree at Millennium Park? And the ones at Navy Pier? And the house on Lincoln Avenue where they have music? I thought I'd let you be the tour guide today, Marcus said, meeting Rebecca's eyes in the rearview mirror. She looked more relaxed already, Zoe's enthusiasm apparently putting her at ease. Their afternoon in downtown Chicago exceeded everyone's expectations. Zoe proved to be an engaging and informative guide, leading them from display to display with running commentary about which lights were new this year and which ones had been her favorites since she was little. Rebecca listened attentively to every detail, asking questions that showed genuine interest in Zoe's opinions and observations. At Navy Pier, they bought hot chocolate and found a bench where they could watch the lights reflect on the lake. Zoe had positioned herself between Marcus and Rebecca, chattering about school and her Christmas wish list while warming her hands around her cup. "Rebecca, do you have kids?" Zoe asked suddenly, with the directness that only children could manage. "No, I don't," Rebecca replied honestly. "I've been so busy with work that I never had time for a family." "That's sad," Zoe said matter-of-factly. "Kids are really fun. You could borrow me sometime if you want to practice." Rebecca looked at Marcus over Zoe's head, her expression a mixture of amusement and unexpected emotion. "That's a very generous offer, Zoe. I might take you up on that." "Good. Daddy needs more help with girl stuff anyway. He's pretty good at most things, but he doesn't know anything about braids or which lip gloss flavors are the best." "Those are definitely important skills," Rebecca agreed seriously. "Maybe I could help with that." As they walked back toward the car, Zoe slipped her hand into Rebecca's without any self-consciousness, trusting in the way that children do when they sense genuine kindness in an adult. Marcus watched Rebecca's face as Zoe chatted about her plans for Christmas break, noting the wonder in Rebecca's expression as she experienced the unfiltered affection of a child. The success of their Christmas lights adventure opened new possibilities for Marcus, Rebecca, and Zoe as a potential family unit. Over the following weeks, their relationship evolved from careful dating to something that felt increasingly natural and inevitable. Rebecca began joining them for weekend activities, initially as Marcus's girlfriend but gradually becoming someone Zoe sought out for advice, comfort, and shared adventures. The transformation in Rebecca surprised everyone, including herself. The woman who had built her identity around professional achievement discovered unexpected joy in helping Zoe with homework, braiding her hair for school pictures, and listening to detailed stories about playground drama and best friend dynamics. She brought the same attention to detail and problem-solving skills that made her successful in business to the challenges of supporting an 8-year-old's emotional and practical needs. "You're different with her," Marcus observed one Sunday evening as they cleaned up after making cookies with Zoe. Rebecca had flour in her hair and frosting on her sweater, looking completely unconcerned about her appearance in a way that would have been unimaginable in their early working relationship. "Different how?" Rebecca asked, loading the dishwasher with the same methodical efficiency she brought to everything else. "Softer. More patient. You let her interrupt you and change your plans without getting frustrated." Rebecca considered this observation while wiping down the counters. "I think it's because she doesn't want anything from me except my attention. At work, everyone needs something specific: solutions, decisions, approvals, guidance. With Zoe, just being present is enough." "And you like that?" "I love it," Rebecca admitted. "I never realized how exhausting it was to always be the person with the answers until I found myself in a relationship where I could just be myself." Their romantic relationship had deepened alongside Rebecca's bond with Zoe, though they were careful to maintain appropriate boundaries given the newness of their family dynamic. Rebecca spent most weekend nights at Marcus's apartment, but always in the guest room when Zoe was home. They shared quiet conversations after Zoe's bedtime, stolen moments of physical affection when they were alone, and the growing intimacy of two people learning to build a life together. At work, their professional relationship continued with careful discretion. They told Rebecca's assistant and the human resources manager about their involvement to ensure proper documentation and avoid any perception of impropriety, but they kept their personal interactions private during business hours. Most of their colleagues remained unaware that their boss was dating the senior account manager, though Marcus sometimes caught curious glances when Rebecca smiled at him during meetings. The first real test of their relationship came in early February when Zoe came down with the flu. Marcus had to leave work early to pick her up from school, and when he called Rebecca to explain his absence, she arrived at his apartment an hour later with soup, children's medicine, and a stack of books she thought Zoe might enjoy. "You didn't have to come," Marcus said, though he was clearly relieved to have help managing a sick child while trying to work from home. "Yes, I did," Rebecca replied, already checking Zoe's temperature and adjusting her pillows. "This is what people in relationships do for each other. Besides, I've never taken care of a sick child before. I need the practice." Over the next 3 days, Rebecca divided her time between running the office and helping Marcus care for Zoe. She worked from his kitchen table while he attended conference calls, brought groceries and prescriptions, and read stories to Zoe when her fever kept her awake. By the time Zoe recovered, Rebecca had seamlessly integrated herself into their family crisis management in a way that felt both natural and permanent. "I think I love her, Daddy," Zoe confided to Marcus one evening after Rebecca had gone home to change clothes and check on work emails. "You think?" "No, I know I do. She makes really good soup, and she doesn't get upset when I'm cranky from being sick. And she knows all the words to the songs from Hamilton." Marcus smiled at his daughter's practical criteria for love. "What do you think about me loving her too?" Zoe considered this question with the seriousness she brought to all important decisions. "I think that would be good. She makes you smile differently than you used to." "How do I smile differently?" "Like you're happy even when you don't think anyone is watching." The wisdom of his 8-year-old's observation struck Marcus deeply. Zoe was right, Rebecca had brought a contentment to his life that he hadn't even realized was missing. For 3 years, he focused entirely on being the best father he could be, setting aside his own needs for companionship and partnership. Rebecca had reminded him that taking care of himself emotionally was also part of taking care of Zoe. That weekend, Marcus planned a special dinner at his apartment while Zoe spent the night with her grandmother. He wanted time alone with Rebecca to talk about their future without the wonderful but constant presence of an energetic child. Rebecca arrived with wine and flowers, still somehow surprised when he went to such trouble for their relationship despite months of evidence that she was important to him. "This is beautiful," she said, looking at the table he'd set with candles and his best dishes. "What's the occasion?" "I wanted to talk about where we go from here," Marcus said as he served the pasta he'd spent all afternoon preparing. "About what we both want from this relationship." Rebecca's expression became more serious as she recognized the significance of the conversation. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want you to move in with us," he said directly. "I want us to be a family, not just people who spend time together on weekends. I want Zoe to have the stability of knowing you'll be there every day, and I want to wake up next to you every morning." The honesty of his declaration caught Rebecca off guard, even though they'd been moving in this direction for weeks. "That's a big step. Are you sure you're ready for that? For all the complications that come with living together?" "I'm sure," Marcus said without hesitation. "But I need to know if you're ready for it too. Living with us would mean giving up some of the independence you've had for 48 years. It would mean being part of every decision about Zoe's life, dealing with her friends and school activities and teenage drama when she gets older. It would mean our relationship becomes the most important thing in your life, not just something that fits around your work schedule." Rebecca was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what he was proposing. Marcus watched her face, trying to read her thoughts while giving her time to consider all the implications of such a significant commitment. "Can I tell you something that might sound crazy?" Rebecca finally asked. "Of course." 3 months ago, the most important thing in my life was quarterly profit reports and client retention statistics. Now the most important thing is whether Zoe remembered to pack her library book and if you're getting enough sleep between work and parenting. I think about you two more than I think about the business, which should terrify me but doesn't. And what does that tell you? It tells me that I've already given up my independence without even realizing it. I've already reorganized my priorities around your family. The only question is whether I'm brave enough to make it official." Marcus reached across the table to take her hands. "Are you brave enough?" Rebecca smiled, the expression transforming her entire face with its warmth and certainty. I love you, Marcus. And I love Zoe. I want to be part of your family more than I've ever wanted anything in my professional life. Even if it means dealing with tantrums and homework battles and teenage years. Especially then, Rebecca laughed. Though I reserve the right to panic occasionally when I have no idea what I'm doing. Deal. But you should know that I panic about parenting decisions at least once a week, so you'll be in good company. They spent the rest of the evening planning the logistics of combining their lives. Rebecca's house was larger and in a better school district, but Marcus's apartment had been Zoe's home for 3 years and represented the stability she'd known since the divorce. They discussed the practical challenges of blending Rebecca's established routines with the organized chaos of life with a child, the financial implications of shared expenses and responsibilities, and the emotional work of becoming a family unit rather than two separate people who happen to care about each other. There's something else we need to talk about, Rebecca said as they cleaned up dinner dishes together. The situation at work. Marcus had been dreading this conversation, though he knew it was necessary. Their relationship had remained discreet so far, but living together would make concealment impossible. More importantly, the potential for conflicts of interest would increase significantly once their personal and professional lives became completely intertwined. I've been thinking about that too, Marcus said. I could start looking for another job, if that would make things easier for you at the agency. Rebecca stopped loading the dishwasher and turned to face him. Marcus, you're one of my best account managers. You have excellent relationships with our biggest clients, and your work has been consistently outstanding for 3 years. I don't want you to leave the company. But dating the boss is one thing. Living with her is another level of complication entirely. I know. Which is why I have a proposal. Rebecca took a deep breath, as if preparing to present a business plan she wasn't entirely sure would be accepted. What if you weren't my employee anymore? What do you mean? What if you were my business partner instead? The suggestion caught Marcus completely off guard. Rebecca, I don't have the capital to buy into the agency. You don't need capital. You need expertise, client relationships, and a proven track record of success, all of which you have. I've been thinking about expanding the business, maybe opening a second location or adding new service lines. I could use a partner who understands both the creative and business sides of the industry. Marcus stared at her, trying to process the magnitude of what she was offering. Are you serious? Completely serious. You'd have equity in the company, decision-making authority, and the ability to shape our future direction. Plus, dating your business partner is much less problematic than dating your boss. Rebecca, that's incredibly generous, but I can't let you make a major business decision based on our personal relationship. I'm not, she said firmly. I'm making a smart business decision that happens to solve our personal problem at the same time. You've earned this opportunity, Marcus. I'm just finally offering it to you. The conversation continued late into the night as they worked through the details of both their personal future and the dramatic changes Rebecca was proposing for their professional relationship. By the time she left his apartment the next morning, they had the framework for a life together that neither of them had imagined possible just a few months earlier. Sunday afternoon, they sat down with Zoe to explain the changes that were coming to their family. Marcus had been nervous about how his daughter would react to the news that Rebecca would be moving in with them, but Zoe's response was characteristically direct and practical. Does this mean Rebecca will be here for breakfast every day? Zoe asked. Yes, Marcus confirmed. And she'll help with my homework and drive me to S6 months later. The Sterling Johnson household had settled into a rhythm that felt both natural and miraculous to everyone involved. Rebecca had sold her Lincoln Park brownstone and moved into a larger house in Lakeview that was close to Zoe's school and had enough space for Marcus's home office and Rebecca's need for a quiet workspace when she brought projects home. The business partnership had exceeded both Marcus and Rebecca's expectations. Sterling Marketing Solutions had rebranded as Sterling Johnson Marketing, reflecting Marcus's new role as co-owner and creative director. Their complementary skills and shared vision for the company's future had resulted in 3 major new client acquisitions and a 15% increase in revenue. More importantly, their professional collaboration had deepened their personal relationship, giving them shared goals and challenges that strengthened their bond as partners in every aspect of their lives. Zoe had blossomed under the attention and stability of having two adults completely invested in her well-being. Her grades improved, her confidence grew, and she developed the easy affectability of a child who felt secure in her family's love. She'd also become the unofficial ambassador for her parents' relationship, proudly introducing Rebecca as my dad's girlfriend who's also my second mom, to anyone who would listen. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Rebecca had to learn the daily rhythms of family life, from morning routines that involved finding lost homework and packing school lunches to bedtime rituals that couldn't be rushed or skipped. Marcus had to adjust to sharing parenting responsibilities and decisions that had been his alone for 3 years. They'd had arguments about discipline strategies, scheduling conflicts between work and family obligations, and the inevitable tensions that arose when independent adults tried to merge their established patterns of living. But they'd also discovered joys neither of them had anticipated. Rebecca found unexpected satisfaction in being the person Zoe turned to for advice about friendship problems and fears about growing up. Marcus experienced the relief and pleasure of having a true partner in the daily work of raising a child, someone who shared the responsibility and celebrated the small victories of parenting. Together, they created a family that was stronger and happier than the sum of its individual parts. The morning of December 15th, exactly 1 year after the office party that had changed everything, Rebecca woke up before her alarm with nervous energy she couldn't quite explain. She'd been planning this day for weeks, coordinating with Marcus's mother and arranging details that she hoped would create the perfect moment for the conversation she'd been wanting to have. "You're up early," Marcus observed as he found her in the kitchen, already dressed and making coffee despite the early hour. "I have something special planned for today," Rebecca said, unable to suppress the smile that had been appearing on her face randomly all week. "Our anniversary dinner isn't until tonight." "What kind of special?" "The kind that involves taking Zoe somewhere fun while you think we're just running errands," Rebecca said mysteriously. "Trust me." Marcus studied her expression, noting the excitement she was trying to contain. "Always. But should I be worried?" "Only if you're not ready for the next chapter of our story." An hour later, the three of them were driving toward downtown Chicago, with Zoe chattering excitedly about their planned visit to the Museum of Science and Industry. Rebecca had told her they were going to see the Christmas exhibit, which was true but not the complete truth about their destination. Their first stop was actually the jewelry store where Rebecca had spent 2 weeks working with a designer to create something unique and meaningful. While Marcus waited in the car with Zoe, Rebecca retrieved a small velvet box that contained not just her hopes for their future, but a symbol of the family they'd already built together. "Ready for the museum?" Rebecca asked as she got back in the car, her heart racing with anticipation. "Rebecca's acting weird today," Zoe observed from the backseat. "She keeps smiling at nothing." "I noticed that too," Marcus said, glancing at Rebecca with curious affection. "But I've learned that when Rebecca has a plan, it's usually worth waiting to see what she's thinking." Their tour through the museum was leisurely and enjoyable, with Zoe serving as enthusiastic guide through her favorite exhibits while Marcus and Rebecca followed behind, holding hands and enjoying her running commentary on everything from the submarine display to the fairy castle. But Rebecca's attention was only partially focused on the museum's offerings. She was waiting for the right moment, the perfect setting for the conversation that would determine their family's future. The opportunity came when they reached the museum's Crown Space Center, a quiet area with a view of the lake where families often gathered to rest and watch the interactive displays. Rebecca had chosen this spot deliberately, remembering Zoe's fascination with space exploration and hoping the setting would add magic to what she was planning. "Can we sit for a minute?" Rebecca asked, indicating a bench near the windows. "I have something I want to talk to both of you about." Marcus and Zoe settled beside her, their expressions curious but not alarmed. Rebecca took a deep breath, feeling more nervous than she had before any business presentation or client meeting in her career. "A year ago today, your dad drove me home from our office party because I'd had too much wine and wasn't thinking clearly," Rebecca began, speaking directly to Zoe but including Marcus in her attention. It was supposed to be just a ride home, but it turned into the most important conversation of my life. Because you fell in love? Zoe asked with 8-year-old directness. Because I discovered what I'd been missing without even knowing it, Rebecca corrected gently. I thought I had everything I needed, a successful business, a nice house, financial security. But I didn't know what it felt like to have a family to love and take care of. Marcus reached for her hand, sensing the emotion behind her words even though he wasn't sure where the conversation was heading. This year has taught me that all the professional success in the world doesn't matter if you don't have people to share it with, Rebecca continued. You two have given me more happiness than I ever thought possible. You've made me a better person, and you've shown me what real love looks like. She reached into her purse and pulled out the small velvet box, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it to reveal not a traditional engagement ring, but something far more meaningful for their unique family situation. Inside the box were 3 rings, a diamond solitaire for Rebecca, a simple gold band for Marcus, and a smaller ring with Zoe's birthstone for their daughter. But these weren't just individual pieces of jewelry, they were designed as a set, with complementary engravings that connected them as symbols of their chosen family. Marcus, Rebecca said, turning to face him directly while keeping Zoe included in the moment, will you marry me? Will you let me be your wife and Zoe's stepmother officially, not just in our hearts? The proposal caught Marcus completely off guard, though he realized afterward that Rebecca's nervous energy and mysterious planning should have given him some warning. He stared at the rings, processing the magnitude of what she was offering, not just marriage, but formal adoption of the family ochre practice. If you want her to, Rebecca said. And we'll all live in the same house like a real family. We're already a real family, Marcus said gently. But, yes, we'll all live in the same house. Zoe considered this information with the careful attention she brought to all important announcements. Good, she finally announced. I like our family better when Rebecca is here all the time. The simplicity of her acceptance reminded Marcus why he'd fallen in love with both of the women in his life. They approached relationships with honesty, generosity, and a willingness to prioritize love over convenience or convention. Building a life with them wouldn't always be easy, but it would always be worth the effort. As they began making concrete plans for their shared future, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that December office party. He'd driven his drunk boss home as a simple gesture of kindness and somehow discovered the partner he'd never allowed himself to hope for. Rebecca had found not just a romantic relationship but an entire family to love and be loved by in return. Their love story hadn't followed any conventional timeline or typical progression, but it had brought them to exactly where they needed to be, together, committed, and ready to build something beautiful from the unexpected connection that had sparked between them on a cold Chicago night. Did you have a good time today? Marcus asked Rebecca as they drove home. The best time I've had in years, Rebecca said, and Marcus could hear the sincerity in her voice. Zoe is amazing, Marcus. You should be so proud of the person she's becoming. I am, Marcus said. But I think she really likes you too. From the backseat, Zoe's voice confirmed his observation. Rebecca, will you come with us to see Christmas lights again next year? Rebecca turned to look at Zoe, her expression soft with an emotion Marcus was beginning to recognize as love. I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so. I'm saying we need to be very careful about how we proceed, Rebecca said. If we decide to explore this, we have to be prepared for scrutiny and judgment from people who don't understand our situation. So you do want to explore it? Rebecca looked at him steadily, and Marcus could see her making a decision that would change everything between them. Yes, I do. But I need to know that you're prepared for the complications. Not just the office politics, but the fact that I'm 8 years older than you, that I'm set in my ways, that I've never successfully balanced a serious relationship with running a business. I'm a single father, Rebecca. My life is already complicated in ways that most people don't understand. Age differences don't scare me, and I'm not looking for someone who'll change their entire life to accommodate mine. I'm looking for someone who understands that real relationships require effort and compromise from both people. And you think we could have a real relationship? Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I think we could have something pretty amazing if we're both willing to work for it. Rebecca smiled, the first completely relaxed expression he'd seen from her since Friday night. Then, I guess we're going to find out what happens when the boss dates one of her employees. His car was parked near the exit, a practical Honda sedan that reflected his priorities as a single father. Reliability over style, function over flash. Rebecca settled into the passenger seat, giving him her address and, then, leaning her head back against the headrest with a sigh. This has been the strangest night, she said as Marcus navigated out of the parking garage onto the nearly empty downtown streets. I can't remember the last time I drank that much at a work event. Or had a real conversation with an employee outside of business topics. Or needed someone to rescue me from my own poor judgment. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, Marcus suggested, stopping at a red light. Sometimes strange nights lead to good changes. Rebecca turned to look at him, her expression curious. What kind of changes? Marcus wasn't entirely sure how to answer that question. The evening had definitely shifted something in how he saw Rebecca, and possibly how she saw him. But whatever was happening between them was new and uncertain, complicated by their professional relationship and the alcohol affecting her judgment. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I have a feeling we're going to find out.